AAA games will probably destroy the industry. This is from Salari. Whoops. And we're going to be talking about this one right now. Let's hear what they have to
This
say.
video is brought to you by the wonderful people who support the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to help out, you can get ad-free early access to new videos at patreon.com.
So Salari has a Patreon.
The release of a AAA game is almost always a big deal, to the point where it's practically a worldwide event. The hype train usually begins a couple of years in advance, often through a teaser trailer that gives us a glimpse at what to expect, and on some occasions what could basically be considered a high-resolution GIF with a title drop.
Yeah, Metroid Prime 4, you remember that one? That was it 6 years ago? I thought it was even longer than that. Yeah, that's been insane. I thought 4 became Metroid Dread. Anyway, let's continue on.
By years of silence. In the run-up to the big day, we get to see some longer trailers, developer diaries, gameplay footage, and if we're
it's called marketing. It's all marketing. All those assets that you see leading up to launch, they have a marketing path up to launch, and then they launch their games. And that's the strategy.
Lucky, maybe even a demo. We're also encouraged to pre-order games to secure our copy as soon as possible, even if it's a digital version with no stock limits. But in exchange, you can get some bonus stuff like exclusive items or maybe a collectible if you...
Yeah, all of this in the industry, I don't mind pre-order bonuses too much. I don't mind like little collectible things. It's an upsell tactic, right? And if they can pre-sell their game and go gold or whatever, like basically cover their costs, then anything after that is just profit, right? So I don't think that's not actually what going gold means. But I have to imagine once you hit a certain threshold of pre-orders, you're probably thinking, okay, our development costs are covered. We're going to be okay going forward. And this stuff just gives them a little bit extra cash. I'm all for it.
Purchase the physical edition.
Maybe not all for it.
Then there's special editions like Deluxe or Ultimate editions, where if you pay more, you get more stuff. Whether it's worth it is subjective, but generally I'd say no. But nonetheless, it's tempting for many players. When the big day comes and the anticipation has reached its peak, millions of players try their best to start playing as early as possible, staying up past midnight to be there when the digital version unlocks, or refreshing the tracking updates of the physical delivery.
I do that. I'm curious, how many of y'all stay up late for digital editions of games? I'm older, so I'm just exhausted by the end of the day. Usually I don't do that very often. Do you stay up late waiting for a digital release? I'm wondering if that's actually a thing.
Load up the game after a modest day one patch downloads, then you and other players around the world get to be part of a major event, to be involved in a grand conversation, share your experiences, ask for and offer tips, make memes, fan art, videos, streams, and more. It's almost like a long-awaited celebration, but even the biggest of celebrations can turn sour if the smallest of things go wrong. It's sadly become all too common that major game releases have been released in less than favorable conditions.
Yeah, and you know what? Laura Fryer has a whole video about how day one patches. Laura Fryer worked at like Xbox during the launch. She worked at Epic Games on the Gears of War franchise. And she talks about how day one patches aren't how it should be. The day one patch should be to like catch some major thing that's discovered, but the game should still launch in a stable state. It's being like used it's being used improperly. And people are really, really tired of it.
Issues like unstable performance, bugs of all shapes and sizes, server issues for online games, or worst of all, a game that's not as good as you thought it would be. It can be demoralizing to say the least. If you spent months or possibly years following an upcoming game in the hopes that it'll be as amazing as the developers say it is, and bought into the hype generated by other players,
and if it's demoralizing to us, imagine how the developer feels having worked on it for 7 years. And then they release Redfall. It's gotta be awful.
If the game falls even slightly short of expectations, the feeling of disappointment can be strong. And some players regrettably become unreasonably angry to the point where they start harassing developers or any.
Don't do this. Don't like go mass spam developers. I don't think this is a healthy response to it. Just don't buy it. Get a refund. Like, especially if you buy on Steam, Steam has a really great refund policy. If you know a game's a stinker, just get your refund. That's the loudest message that you can send, you know?
Anyone else involved in the making of the game for that matter. A disappointing game isn't necessarily a bad game, it's just not the game that people expected it to be, and the expectations people have for many AAA titles can be immeasurable, something which I'm sure puts an intense amount of pressure on the people who make these games.
Here's the thing. I think expectations realistically are, don't lie in your marketing material, right? Like, don't sell us a fake bill of goods, I think is the saying. Launch stable enough that the game's playable. It's like, so keep your promise is part one. Part two is launch stable enough that it can be playable. Don't tell me the PS4 version of Cyberpunk's going to look and feel the way your marketing material said. Cyberpunk is such a crazy example because they demoed that game on old hardware and they made it look like it was like great. They did a live stream of it on Xbox One, right? They're like, yeah, that's how the game's going to look. And everyone's like, oh, great. Yeah, I'll pre-order. And then that was not what launched. And they're like, whoops, we didn't know. You literally played it on a live stream. How did you not know? How did you not know it was running at 10 frames per second? It isn't easy. And I do think, I think there's, don't harass developers, obviously. Like, that's not what you should do. But you should be loud about how you spend your money and don't support games that rip you off, basically. There's a refund policy, especially like on Steam, there's a refund policy. A lot of games have refund policies. But yeah, there's no reason to go to like the person who did the rigging and harass them on Twitter. It's not.
However, AAA
healthy.
games are made under a mandate to appeal not only to the largest audience possible, but to publishers, investors, shareholders, and to be released by a deadline, that all-important release date chosen to ensure their game is available to purchase at the optimal time of year, usually in the run-up to the holidays or around springtime. And that release date is often non-negotiable, even if the developers feel that the game isn't ready yet. The release of a game, whether it's disappointing or even good, can also be hampered by the inclusion of aggressive monetization, something which I spoke about at length in my previous video, where players are regularly reminded.
This looks like I'm going to have to react to this one too. Games are an expensive time-stealing nightmare. Like, obviously I don't claim to be super smart or anything like that. I'm just an average guy that talks about games for a living, right? So the way that I say it, and he seems very intelligent, the way that I say it is, we are being forced into these grindy games that hold retention metrics higher than any other metric. Why? Because the higher the retention metric, the more likely you are to spend money in the property. But unfortunately, the retention metric strategy works on like, what, 5% of the users? That means 95% of people are just like, I am so exhausted by this grind. I hate it. So I'm betting that's what he talks about. Games are an expensive time-stealing nightmare.
In the game's menus that if they want their character to look nicer or gain some gameplay benefits, if they pay more than the initial cost of entry, they can enhance their experience.
And somebody just said happened with No Man's Sky, right? What happened with No Man's Sky was they broke their promise. They promised one thing and then it launched and it wasn't that thing. If they would have launched in early access or they would have said, you know, we're launching with an earlier version of the game, they would have kept their promise. So keep your promise of the marketing material and make sure the game runs at launch. I think that's largely what gamers want, right?
The common defense for this from publishers, developers, and even some consumers is that games are expensive to produce, so they need to make money where they can. There is, however, some truth to this. Game production has some eye-wateringly high costs, but there's a reason behind that that isn't always due to the demand of players, but an industry that's perpetuated the belief that they're a necessity, but more on that later. It's fairly well known at this point that the video game industry brings in a ludicrous amount of money from consumers.
Accurate.
It's by far the highest grossing entertainment market in the world, earning more than the movie and music.
Okay, so 192.7 billion, 120 billion for print and ebooks? Really? Books do better than home and theatrical releases? Is that true? Are you not entertained? Entertained estimated global revenue from video games, books, filmed entertainment, and recorded music. Wow, I had no idea books were such a huge industry still. I would figure everybody's on the internet or something.
Industry combined, something which has been an ongoing trend for years now. The industry for video games has been growing steadily pretty much since Nintendo entered the market in the 1980s and shows no sign of stopping. The average age of a person that plays games regularly is around 35 years old.
35 to 44. I think it shows no sign of stopping, but it's definitely changing towards mobile. Like mobile's the biggest growth sector, but yeah, gaming's not going anywhere.
A demographic which has a somewhat decent amount of disposable income to spend on luxury products, and even though there was a significant amount of stigma towards gaming as a hobby.
Producer brain, I really wish he'd reduce his headspace. He has too much headspace in the video, and like I'm cropping it, so it's like even worse than this, but yeah.
In the 90s and 2000s, their popularity has never really
Maybe he's doing it for the punch.
We're now at a point in time where around 40% of the world's population plays video games, and given that gaming as a hobby has essentially been normalized among children and teenagers, that number is guaranteed to grow to the point where the majority of the world will be playing. A growing market brings with it the opportunity to increase profits exponentially through whatever means possible, even if that means creating and releasing a product that fails to deliver on all fronts. With AAA games, if there's one factor that they all share, is that they're largely designed to appeal to the widest market possible. Almost every large budget release over the past 2 generations of consoles can be considered an action game in which the player controls a character that engages in combat against enemies. The form of combat can vary, but ultimately these games...
All the games he's showing are fantastic games. Really, really, really awesome games.
Are people playing a protagonist that beats the baddies. Of course, this can depend on the context of a game's story. I don't want to paint with broad strokes and say that every game is a story of good versus evil, since there are numerous explorations of gray zones within games, but as objectives go in AAA games, it's generally a case of you versus them. The general progression in these games is that you face stronger enemies the further you get, face off against bosses, add weapons or skills to your arsenal, and travel through new parts of the game's world. There are various ways in how these goals are achieved, but big budget games, especially the more successful ones, tend to follow this template. And I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't an entertaining formula, something I've enjoyed numerous times over. And
it is, but I think when you get older, I think you start to see the carrot and the stick. And right now I'm playing like a pretty different genre. Like Pal World's a very different genre for me, and I'm having a good time with it. So it's really nice that we have sort of this breakup in the industry right now where not every game is a linear story adventure. And there's some really, really great experiences like Pal World's super fun. There's a game I'm going to be talking about next week, probably on the live stream, probably play it on the live stream. And I'm excited to tell you about how much I like it. So yeah, more on that soon.
And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that.
What exactly is the Sandbox?
Oh, we got the ad.
3D metaverse. The building blocks are voxel.
There is an argument to be made, though, that this template has become a problem. Familiarity is
fatiguing.
Comforting. When you know what to expect from something, you can still gain enjoyment from it. But it can put people in a position where they become more reluctant to see what else might be available to them.
Well, I think that we had so much time during COVID to play whatever we wanted that we hit this point where we had experienced everything. and we knew what the next thing was going to be, and people sort of fatigued. So that's why there was like overhiring. That's why there's all these layoffs now, because they thought, oh, it's just going to like explode from this point forward. And that just didn't happen. People got all the gaming that they wanted, and they were like, you know what? I kind of want to go outside. At least some of us. Some people went outside.
For example, let's say there's a person that when they want to eat dinner, they go to McDonald's every time. Ignoring the potential nutritional issues with a diet that's almost exclusively fast food, the reason someone might make this choice is because they know what to expect from McDonald's. They know and like the taste of a Big Mac, the fries, the supposedly unique taste of
Yes,
their
I want McDonald's now.
And if they fancy something a bit different, they can try other things off the menu, but still have some sense of familiarity. Comfort. It's the same reason why most of us have our comfort foods. I personally enjoy a good donut when I'm in need of a pick-me-up, like these apple cider donuts that I made recently. One person's McDonald's may be another's mac and cheese
Those
or
donuts look great.
grilled cheese sandwich. Familiarity is nice, but it's also restrictive. The person who enjoys McDonald's every day may be comforted, but they're also missing out
Where's he going with this analogy?
on a world of other amazing dishes and potentially their new favorite food. Mass appeal products are kind of like McDonald's in that you have some idea of what you're getting into when you buy it.
Yes.
I don't mean to say that AAA games are as underwhelming as McDonald's, but they have become safe on a mechanical level.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. Diablo 4 is a really, really good example. Maybe that's part of it. Like, games don't want to challenge you too much anymore. Or they challenge you in ways that are just like silly, you know? That's a super interesting way to put it, because mechanically, I feel like a lot of games have been simplified, and then a lot of gamers, when they get presented something like the Path of Exile skill tree, they like freak out. They're like, oh, I don't know what to do. That seems complicated. Just give me like 3 options and I pick one and see what happens. That might be part of it. Things have changed quite a bit.
Familiarity is the enemy of experimentation, and even though big budget titles have given us some great innovations both in gameplay and narratives, it's hard to say whether they help the medium grow in any substantial way. Not too long ago, games were much cheaper to produce.
Yeah, they have to play it safe. So like Suicide Squad is a big bet for Rocksteady, and a lot of people are really concerned because they're like, hey, I don't like that much. And the problem is they have a winning formula with the Batman games. They could have made a Superman game or some other superhero game and seen massive success, but they're like, let's do Suicide Squad. Let's do this totally different thing from what we've done. And like, that's a $400 million bet. And it could be very problematic for the whole industry taking bets like that.
And quicker to make. They were made by smaller teams, and although they were created with the intent of earning a profit, there was less pressure to remain within the confines that were defined by the market's more successful products.
I don't think Nintendo Mario games have changed, but like, it's the same jump on the bad guys formula. Sometimes we get like a Super Mario Galaxy that's a bit of a departure, but I don't think Nintendo gets all that crazy. I think that's a bad example. I think Suicide Squad is a better example where it's a pretty big departure from what Rocksteady's known for. But I get his point.
As such, there was more room for experimentation. Creators were able to take advantage of the opportunity to create games which consumers may not know that they would like, and would go on to influence and innovate the games that came after it, possibly even creating entirely new genres. In other words, developers had the privilege of being able to take a gamble and lose, whereas in today's market, failure to meet expectations is often met with major repercussions, including job losses, studio shutdowns, or even an aversion to experimenting again, leading...
So here's my thing on that, right? Everybody's going to take their shot and try and do the best. And I do agree with this presentation and this person about how that stifles creativity. And that's definitely concerning. But that's sort of like the nature of everything in the world, right? Like a McDonald's competitor could open up and they could be just fine, but maybe they don't catch on like McDonald's does. That's just the nature of the world we live in. That's how it works. Some games are massively successful, or some burger joints are massively successful, and some just don't hit. I had a cookie business for 2 years. My cookies were phenomenal. They were really, really good cookies, but they didn't catch. Like, I'm not a millionaire from the cookie business, right? Things come, they go. Some are huge successes, some aren't. And if these studios play it too safe, then they run into a danger. If they play it too risky, they run into a danger. And everybody chasing the games as a service is definitely a danger.
Higher ups to demand that the future products they create adhere to the demands of the mass market. Many of these games were made to be loved for what they were, and not because they're similar to other popular products on the market. Titles like Super Mario Bros., Pokemon, Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Doom, Resident Evil, Half-Life, Ocarina of Time, Shadow of the Colossus, Halo, Dark Souls, and more have all had their DNA included and altered in some kind of ways in countless games that followed it, and they all have a place among the greats for that very reason. Sure, some of them were expensive to produce, at least relative to the time and the size of the industry during that period, but they were still a gamble. Conceptually, they were unique or different enough to be considered a risk.
We still see gambles all the time in modern day, but not from the AAA space. The AAA space is a business, period. It's just something that we have to get used to. Microtransactions aren't going anywhere because people buy them. As long as people keep buying microtransactions, they're not going to go anywhere. The upsell tactics are continually going to be there. But every once in a while, we get a studio that cares about making art. A studio like Larian. The Pal World team, maybe not, but we get surprises like Pal World, which is embroiled in this drama about using AI generative art, potentially. There's been no confirmation of that, and they did say that they hand drew a lot of the characters, so we'll see how that one pans out. Point being, I think the AAA space has to play it safe, and that's somewhat problematic. But I think Final Fantasy 16 is a pretty big departure from the previous Final Fantasies, and it's fantastic. So I don't know. I think some are guilty of it. And then like Rocksteady's taking a big gamble with Suicide Squad. Like, even if we hate it, they did something different.
For many, notably in the West, Final Fantasy VII was a completely foreign concept, given that it was a turn-based combat game where you waited turns to attack your enemies, but it sold extremely well, creating a massive legacy which still continues to this day. Dark Souls came out at a time in which games had a growing tendency to hold the player's hand, tell them where to go, what to do, and at the same time offer them a power fantasy where they felt like an unstoppable force.
All these
Dark
games
Souls,
are so
on the
good.
other hand, put you in an overbearingly hostile world, gave you limited means of survival, no direction, and had you learn by dying repeatedly. But despite all this, it was a runaway success, to the point where it and its predecessor Demon Souls created the Soulsborne genre, which spawned numerous imitators including Neo, Lords of the Fallen, Remnants, Lies of P, and more. Its success eventually resulted in the creation of From Software's Elden Ring, the second best-selling game of last year, which is quite shocking given that the modern market is largely dominated by games which offer more accessibility in
I don't think every game studio needs to change the formula massively every time. If you go work at From Software, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be working on Armored Core, or you're going to be working on a Soulsborne-like game, right? Because that's their craft. That's what they've mastered. And I think that's okay. I think the problem is a little bit more nuanced with these bets and innovation, right? I think Elder Scrolls does a lot of fantastic things that the previous games in the series didn't do. Like, there was something really, really special about Elder Scrolls. I don't know what it was, but clearly it resonated with people in a way that no other game in their series history had. And From Software is fantastic. I think there are times when a studio will depart too far from what they're known for, and that's problematic.
regards to difficulty, and Elden Ring is not an easy game for most people, regardless of what its die-hard fans may say. The point being, creating games that aren't designed from the ground up to appeal to the masses can...
I think, you know what? I think he's wrong on that. I think Elden Ring was very massively successful. Like, all those people buying and playing the Elden Ring, they're not all gamers. I know people who are not gamers who played Elden Ring and wouldn't stop talking about it. Elden Ring was some sort of cultural phenomena. I've never seen anything like that. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is another example. Like, there's people that don't play games normally playing games, and Elden Ring was one of those games. So I do think Elden Ring had mass appeal, unlike any of the other Soulsborns. So that's one I would disagree on.
Lead to something special. I'm not the first to say this, but in general, the public doesn't really know what it wants. It's only through giving them something different that we can learn about their tastes, and we can learn about our own tastes. As much as you like McDonald's, it's good to try another dish every now and then, even if that means risking a bad meal.
Variety is the spice of life, right?
However, there's a problem with this, and it goes back to what I said earlier. Making and marketing games has become expensive, particularly in the AAA space. With something like the movie industry, production budgets and earnings are shared with the public. In most cases, though, the cost of developing a AAA game is kept as a secret between the publisher and shareholders, making it truly difficult to grasp the average cost. And that's without even factoring in the marketing costs, which in many cases can be nearly identical to production costs. But once again, these are mostly a mystery. Just in the past few years, with inflation taken into account, 3 of the top 5 most expensive games ever have been produced, including Cyberpunk 2077, The Last of Us Part 2, and Horizon Forbidden West. The latter two cost over $200 million to produce, and Cyberpunk, according to the developer CD Projekt Red, cost $400.
Okay, let's talk about why. Do you know why Cyberpunk cost $483 million? Because it's built from the ground up. They built the artwork. They built everything. It's a new IP. Last of Us Part 2 and Horizon Forbidden West are iterations. And the bang for their buck on that $249 million and that $212 million, well, I don't know about Horizon, but I think it would be good, right? They know that if they invest that amount of money into a property, they get a return. Cyberpunk, I imagine they've made back that money, or they will with the sequel, or they will with Phantom Liberty, because they've built the infrastructure to continue building their games. That's why this one's so much higher, because it's a new thing, right?
$183 million adjusted for inflation. Needless to say, but that's a lot of money. Enough to rival some of Hollywood's biggest film productions. And with bigger costs come bigger risks, and a bigger need to mitigate that risk by creating products with mass market appeal that play it safe by catering to gamers' desire for familiarity. One common criticism with PlayStation exclusive titles like Horizon Forbidden West and the Last of Us series is that there's too many similarities between them, and they follow a particular formula. Specifically, high production, story-heavy, character-driven action games where you play from a third-person perspective in an open or semi-open world setting.
But here's the thing. That is PlayStation's bread and butter. Single player experiences that take you on a linear experience and tell a amazing, compelling story. That is PlayStation's bread and butter. And the problem with them going games as a service is it goes against their DNA. It goes against why everybody follows them. And like, you can try one of those a year, but they're just like, we're going to make 20. It's a mistake.
This has sort of been the case since Sony started finding momentum during the PS3's lifespan, and it was arguably kicked off by the success of Uncharted 2 by developer Naughty Dog, who have since become the pedigree for the PlayStation exclusive scene. These exclusives also happen to be visually stunning, to the point where you can practically see the budget in every character model and environment. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that these games are bad. Far from it. Some of these are genuine all-time greats and personal favorites of mine, largely because I'm a sucker for a good story, and many of these games do a damn good job at telling one. I do have to ask though, What are these games doing on a mechanical level that makes them unique? How much are they experimenting or trying something new? As much as I love some of these games, I do have to admit that they are a bit formulaic.
He's right, but I don't think that's a problem. If you go play Spider-Man and they iterate with fast travel and some of the other technology by like bringing in Miles Morales for a little bit more spice, and it does successful numbers in terms of sales, I think that's okay. I don't think Insomniac needs to reinvent the wheel. And I would love it if they got to like try one new thing every once in a while. I feel like Ratchet is sort of their playground and Spider-Man is their bread and butter. Like, you do the bread and butter thing so that you can do the other thing, right? That's just how it goes.
There's also the fact that many of the big releases that we see these days are sequels from long-established franchises, which is what you get when companies become more risk-averse and choose to leverage a pre-existing audience rather than funding a new, untested intellectual property and hoping it finds success. The question we have to ask though is, do AAA games have to be so expensive, and what could be gained from making them cheaper?
When you have these woke revolutions, it requires all of us at some point to say no.
All right.
To the first question, the answer is kind of a maybe. One of the problems with current big budget game development is that many deem it to be an unsustainable model. Ex-CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment America, Sean Layden, who oversaw the releases of numerous AAA titles, said he believes that the industry needs to reconsider the escalating costs of AAA game development.
He's absolutely right. Game prices are out of control. They're putting way too much in their budget. Like, I just don't understand how games have gotten that expensive. If there's the ROI there, sure, keep dumping $200 million into it. But I agree with Layden. I don't think that games need to cost that much. They just don't.
And the kind of games that are produced. In regards to this, Sean said the following.
I don't think that in the next generation you can take those numbers and multiply them by 2 and think that you can grow.
And added,
I think the industry as a whole needs to sit back and go, all right, what are we building? What's the audience?
That's the key line. What is the audience's expectation? Marvel's Spider-Man 2 didn't need to reinvent the wheel. Just keep telling those great stories, right? Meet the make a promise, keep it, launch in a stable state.
Audience expectation. What is the best way to get our story across and say what we need to say?
As many of you know, the standard box price of a AAA game is now $70, which is a lot of money.
They're talking about
for most
increasing it.
people. I find myself waiting for sales more and more often these days because I can't really justify the purchase of so many big game releases in a single year. But relative to the cost of inflation, the cost of a video game hasn't really increased. Just 10 years ago, $60 was worth almost $80 at the current rate. But of course, this can vary depending on where you live in the world, like in a recent case where Steam's lazy regional pricing exploded the cost of games in countries such as Argentina and Turkey. The problem is that many gamers see high-fidelity, high-budget games as the norm now, and some will go as far as avoiding or even ridiculing games that don't live up to the standards set by.
Is it just me, or does Ragnarok look exactly the same as God of War 2018? I think people like that are really, really in the minority. And I think we keep listening. This has 12 upvotes. Like, and it's from 2 years ago. They're in the minority. There's always going to be 5% of your audience that hate, like 5% of my audience probably hates everything that I do, you know? So I just don't think that people complaining about the fruit in Halo Infinite are the people we should be listening to.
Its predecessors, doing petty things like comparing screenshots between
Gandalf making a guest appearance. I remember Gandalf. I don't even know if he posts anymore. But anyway, yeah, stuff like this was panned. Everybody made made fun of
and
that.
older games to demonstrate how the graphics aren't good enough. It's an obnoxious mentality that doesn't help anyone, especially.
And it's 1% of the market. Most people aren't like that. Most normal people are not like that. Twitter has made it where we feel like we need to respond to every console war tweet like it's what everybody thinks. No, it's like 1% of the audience is making the boat comparison. Like the boat comparison that Gandalf made. How many people were like, yeah, the boat animations reused. That's what I care about. Don't listen to those people.
Especially the developers who put so much of their time and effort into creating these worlds. But gamer entitlement, what more can you say, really? The games industry is sort of in the same place.
No, bro, you found a post with 15 upvotes and you found another one that was panned. So I think there's what he really needs to say is there's a lot of idiots out there, but they don't account for most of the audience. They just don't.
As the movie industry right now, in that spending massive amounts of money on a small handful of big projects is safer than spending less money on more projects, something which sounds kind of absurd when you say it out loud, but when you've cultivated an audience to invest in your brand, it makes sense from a business point of view. You can put all your eggs in one basket if you've convinced everyone that your eggs are the best.
Look, when George Lucas made Star Wars, it's a great example, right? Keep making Star Wars. Yeah, and keep telling great stories, and your audience is going to be there. Just don't betray them. I know there's been a lot of controversy about the most recent Star Wars films. I like those movies. I think they're fine. I don't go in with like a lot of expectation for the films. I guess I just want to have a good time. And I think that's where most people are. We have to remember that the majority of people aren't as invested as we are in every little detail about like even the Halo TV show. Apparently it was successful enough to warrant a second season. So if you're Naughty Dog and you're making Last of Us or you're making Uncharted, keep making those games. And every once in a while, do a little spin-off team to do something interesting like the Pentiment team did with Xbox, right? Do that. Keep the creative juices flowing. Keep your bread and butter going, but do a little bit of that extra stuff every once in a while to keep your creativity fresh.
But as you can surmise, this means that smaller and more unique projects end up taking a back seat, leaving the indie game scene to pick up the slack. In that respect,
yeah.
I guess we can kind of thank the AAA market. The indie scene grew exponentially as AAA games became the norm. Because of that, we've had...
Gotta be honest with you, I am so fatigued by the AAA market lately. I am hyped for all the indie games coming. God, next week you're going to hear about an indie game that I'm really excited to talk about. And like, indie games aren't perfect. Like right now, Pal World is taking off. It's hugely popular. There's a little bit of drama about AI generation potentially being utilized. We don't know. They said they hand drew a lot of them. So we don't know what's going on there yet. But point being, the indie scene has been so cool, or at least like the more independent scene, like Larian taking off with Baldur's Gate 3, the Elden Ring games taking off with success. And then smaller games like Pal World exploding. It's been really, really exciting to see people who aren't in the AAA space having massive success, because later on, we're going to see people take new chances. Like I think Concord from PlayStation is a good example. We don't really know what that game is, but it's something new, and we'll learn more about it soon.
Some remarkable games that major publishers probably wouldn't have touched otherwise. It also helps that digital distribution made it far easier for game creators to put their work in front of people. I'm not sure that games like Hades, Celeste,
Please, better examples than the ones I gave,
Disco Elysium would have even made it had the conditions not been right, let alone be successful games. Aside from the intense amount of labor that goes into making AAA games with high-fidelity 4K resolution graphics, one big reason why they take so much time and money to produce is because, in general, they're very long games. If you search for almost any modern AAA title on howlongtobeat.com, you'll find that pretty much every single one of them takes about 20 hours or more just to complete the main quest line, and more if you want to clear the side content. Now, it's understandable why this is a selling point to a lot of people. If you're spending $70 on a game that you want to get your mileage out of, for that much, it'd be disappointing to be done with it after only 5 or 8 hours.
I just want to say something really quick. A lot of people were upset about the idea of Hellblade 2 being similar in length to the first game. I think that is great. I don't particularly care. If that is the experience that the creators wanted to share and show us, wonderful. I don't think we need some falsely inflated missions. What would be better? That it's the same length, or that they put a bunch of garbage in there where it's like, all right, you know what we need now? We need you to go get 5 apples. Oh, you got the apples. Good job. Now go get 17 pine cones. You're going to have to go mine in the open world. Oh, you got the pine cones. Thank goodness. Just so that they could say that the game was twice as long. Okay, let's put a bunch of nonsense in the middle of it. No, what you would really want is just a longer story. But what if the story only takes 8 hours to tell? And they're like, yeah, look, we could add more to this, but it turns out it's about the same length. And like, this is the story we wrote and that we want to tell. Do we really need to flesh this out more for the value proposition? And that game's only $49.99. So you're already paying $20 less than a 7. Like, that's incredible, right? Okay, look, it's digital only. Because of the distribution savings, we're not going to charge as much. We know that some people will be upset about the length, so we've reduced $20 off of the price point. Like, how is that not a win? It's crazy to me.
It'd be like paying for a full price movie ticket, and it turns out the movie's only 90 minutes long instead of your typical 2.5 hour plus runtime.
It's not a problem.
Every damn movie seems to be now. Please, just make movies shorter. I've got stuff to do. 90 minutes is fine. There's nothing wrong with long games. For some, like RPGs, it's somewhat of a necessity. But there are also games where the long runtime works against it. Either way, though, the normalization of the 20+ hour runtime has resulted in extremely lengthy production cycles, and of course, rapidly inflating budgets. The gap between AAA releases from major studios can be as long as 5 years or more, which
5 to 7
includes sequels with pre-existing assets that can be ported or built upon from previous games in the series. Or in the case of...
I will say, because I record these live, but Javier, you're right. No physical edition is a big L. You're absolutely right. Hellblade 2 should have a physical edition. So I don't mean to like give that a pass. That sucks. And it affects preservation. But I suppose you could take your copy of the game and install it on a disc maybe for keeping it, but I agree with that.
The finally announced Grand Theft Auto 6, it can be a 12-year window. You can probably thank the cash cow that is GTA Online for that. Less frequent releases means less chances to earn money for the studios, greater gambits, bigger budgets, and fewer opportunities for developers to experiment with something different, since they're stuck in lengthy cycles of creating huge hits that adhere to the winning formula established.
Spitfire says, honestly, AI creating assets could in turn quicken production time and lower the cost of making them. I absolutely agree. I think that's what we're going to see with AI. I think iteration's going to be shortened drastically, and I think that's a good thing. I think everybody's hating on AI, but once they see how it's helpful, granted, there's a lot of moral stuff that's accurate and totally reasonable to call out, but in the long run, I think it's going to be an amazing tool that will push the industry forward.
By the industry. I do not want to undermine the work of developers. As I said, I truly believe that many AAA game releases are incredible, but I am left wondering how satisfied they are by being a part of this. If you're someone who works in the AAA...
Okay, well, here's what they do. They go to a different company. Okay, I've released 2 Last of Us games. I'm ready to move on. Or they start their own studio. Like, it's when people talk about like, oh, so-and-so left this studio and went to the other studio. Yeah, because they don't want to make Halo for the 15th time, or they're tired of making Uncharted. Sometimes people get to a point in their lives where they just want to do different stuff. You do it for 10 years, you switch companies, and you make a different type of game. That's how you solve the problem, right? Oh, I don't want to do this my whole life. If you're one of those people and you want to try something new, go to a different studio. And if you've released The Last of Us, I imagine you're going to be able to go somewhere else.
AAA industry, then please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, because I am genuinely interested. As we know, at this point, the life of a game developer isn't an easy one thanks to the poor treatment of game studios.
Yeah.
But I do think it is telling how even big industry names have left studios to work on independent projects and escape bland corporate mechanisms.
Yeah, but like, I've said for a long time on this channel that I do think we're going through an industry reset period, and stuff like this, stuff like ex-Apex Legends and Titanfall leads form new studio, Wildlight Entertainment. They're doing something new. That's awesome. That is great. Are they all going to be successful? No, they're not, but they took a shot. And I think that's really cool and should be commended. I don't think it's some negative thing where they're like, we got to escape. Yeah, escape with enough money to start a studio? Are you kidding me? I think everything's okay. And like, if you've released 1 or 2 bangers and you're ready to try at a different studio,
as I was working on
you're
this
going to
video,
find work.
One particular
Well, you will eventually.
game kept popping into my head.
Still going.
2019's Death Stranding by Kojima Studios, helmed by the legendary game developer Hideo Kojima. Kojima created the Metal Gear Solid series, considered by many, including myself, to be one of the best video game franchises of all time. After a mysterious dispute between Kojima and his longtime employer Konami, he left them and created his own studio. It also didn't help that Konami wanted to pivot into the mobile market and pachinko machines, leading to the cancellation of Silent Hills, which probably would have ended up being the best horror game of all time, but now it's gone. Due to his legacy
in life, Paul Singh says Death Stranding equals walking simulator. Death Stranding's great. I really, really love Death Stranding. Played through that whole game. That is what everybody says about it. But if you actually play it and you kind of get invested in the building of infrastructure for the world again, it becomes very fun very quick. I really enjoyed that one. Not for everybody, but I am much more positive about that. And look at what Kojima's managed to do. You hit a point in your career, like Kojima did, on game development, right? I imagine you hit a point in your career where you're like, hey, I want to do something vastly different from what I've been doing. I can stay here and play it safe, or I can take a big leap and go try something for myself. And Kojima did it, and he knocked it out of the frickin' park. And now he's doing stuff for Microsoft. He has his own studio, his own team. He doesn't have to answer to anybody. Like, I think it's awesome what Kojima accomplished. Lots of respect.
Prolific game creator, Kojima created a new studio, and Sony funded the production.
And we see BioWare doing it. We see all these companies helping or starting new things.
Of Death Stranding, but allowed him to do so with practically no oversight or interference. They simply trusted that he would make a good game because, well, he's Hideo Kojima. Long story short, we ended up with Death Stranding, a game starring numerous Hollywood actors like Norman Reedus, Mads Mikkelsen, who my wife has a worrying fascination with, Lea Seydoux, and 2 of Kojima's favorite directors, Nicholas Winding Refn and Guillermo del Toro. There was a very long run-up to the game with a handful of surreal trailers, leaving fans to speculate for a few years on what the game was about and how it would play. Eventually, we found out that Death Stranding was a long cinematic game in which you, as Norman Reedus' character, Sam Bridges, played as a guy who delivered packages. People were a little split on the idea, but nevertheless, it was a Kojima game, so it must be good, right? Well, it's not that straightforward. For many, a game where the majority of the time is spent walking across...
I think the game was contentious. I agree with this assessment of Death Stranding. It was a contentious game, and I've played everything Kojima's ever made in the Metal Gear series, or touched, like even Metal Gear Acid. I didn't play Police Knots, but I think Death Stranding is a fantastic game. So I agree it's contentious. And somebody in chat brought up Starfield. Starfield, I'd say, was contentious. It's their first foray to try something pretty new. It's like a space exploration game. Largely, though, they have a whole review sheet in their marketing where it's all 10s out of 10s. Seems like it made them a lot of money. So I think we're going to get more Starfields in the future, and they'll address a lot of the critiques and criticisms. And hopefully they utilize what they learned with Starfield for the next Elder Scrolls. I'm happy about the industry resetting, because you know what's going to happen? Kojima is going to go out and he's going to become the next Konami, right? The BioWare teams, like everybody from BioWare went off to do their own studio. One of them could potentially become the next EA. It's not going to happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight for EA, but there is a potential that we see a whole new life breathing into the industry. New life will be breathed into the industry. I'm not smart. And I'm excited by that.
Fields and mountains while hauling a bunch of packages on your back and appendages between lengthy cutscenes wasn't an appealing selling point. There were some action elements in the game, but they were limited, as the story makes it very clear that killing another person can quite literally have catastrophic results. And considering that many AAA titles are sold on the back of the satisfaction of destroying your enemies, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Depending on who you ask, Death Stranding was either a great game or a boring game. Personally, I really liked it. There were a few embarrassing moments, like Sam and Princess Beach having a slow motion run on the shoreline. More than anything though, I and many others appreciated that the studio was given the opportunity and budget to create something that wasn't designed to cater to a bullet point list of what gamers currently like. Kojima has more clout than probably any other game developer out there. He's so revered that his name is put next to the game title.
Well, that's a little bit of him doing that, right? I would argue that Cliff Bleszinski had a shot, but when he did Lawbreakers, I think it was Lawbreakers, right? It just didn't resonate with people. And sometimes you take a shot and it misses. And that's just how it goes. Sometimes things don't pan out, and that sucks, right? But to say that it's somebody's fault that it didn't pan out, that I can't get behind.
On the box. Not everyone can be Kojima, so they can't exactly ask a publisher to write a blank check so they can make an experimental title like Death Stranding.
Another good example.
That's just the industry for you.
Just
the
like
$70 price tag may be justifiable on the games that we currently get because of how they're produced, but we could do things differently. Even though there is a segment of consumers who like to whine about the visual quality of video games, especially indie ones, they're a vocal minority. And they're the ones that go out of their way to make games.
See, he just counteracted his point earlier in the video. Earlier in the video, he said something along the lines of people whining about video games and how like that's bad. But like now he's saying it's a very small percentage, which is the truth. Most people aren't like out there making these stupid comparisons. They're just reacting to them.
Developers and artists feel bad about their work, so screw them. Games also don't have to be a 20+ hour experience. A short game is perfectly fine if done well, and if we're being honest, many people just don't have the time to complete long games. Remember that the average age of the person who plays video games is 35 years old, the same
44.
demographic that works 9-hour shifts and probably has to look after a kid or two between those.
Hey, we're No Compromise Gaming, your ticket to lease-to-own gaming PCs for people with zero.
A short while back,
I'm getting YouTube Brad.
Got some widespread attention after the user said, I want shorter games with worse graphics.
So I don't think this was the original tweet. It might have been, but I agree. I agree with this. I don't think we need longer games. We just don't, because you get nonsense.
Made by people who are paid more to work less. And I'm not kidding. And you know what? They're right. The games industry is booming right now. But like any entertainment industry, it's not immune to being toppled or being reset. From the 1930s to the late 1950s, the Hollywood film industry was thriving under the stewardship of 5 major studios. But as movie budgets skyrocketed and they couldn't convince enough people to buy tickets, it all came tumbling down. The video game industry may have produced some of the most profitable entertainment products of all time, but
neither money nor passion guarantee success. Neither do. Neither guarantee success. Sometimes it's a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill.
Even the largest of monuments can be toppled. All it can take is a handful of failed games, and the landscape of gaming as we know it could transform dramatically. And as that happens, people will lose their jobs. Studios will shut down in an effort to protect the bottom line. Because of that situation, though, Hollywood started taking risks.
Let's talk about Saints Row. What happened with Saints Row? This game wasn't particularly good. It was a massive departure from the Saints Row formula. They put all their money into it. Like when you release your reveal trailer and everybody hates it, fix it. Fix it. It wasn't a good game. And like, I didn't even play Saints Row. I watched enough clips of the glitches and just bad gameplay. And I'm just like, yeah, that game, I'm not going to spend my time playing that game.
In an effort to protect the bottom line. Because of that situation, though, Hollywood started taking risks again by hiring young filmmakers with fresh ideas, and it turned out that people loved them. Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, George Lucas, and others revitalized cinema.
And we're seeing that reset in the games industry right now. Games like Pal World coming along out of nowhere and seeing massive success. Larian coming along with Baldur's Gate 3. Like we're going to see, and Larian's like a very large company right now. We're going to see new places come up out of nowhere. We're going to see old legacy brands like Activision fold into Microsoft, right? And new studios are going to reform. It's how everything in life works, isn't it? Right? Something changes, you move on. And the games industry, like, it's not going anywhere. People aren't, like, everybody's not just one day going to stop playing video games.
Went on to create what many consider to be some of the greatest films of all time. Great things can come from change, even if that means taking risks and possibly losing along the way. The games industry, as it stands, can afford to take a few risks, and they don't have to spend $200 million each time that they want to do so. Shorter games with lower production budgets can be great.
I don't think the game needs to be shorter. I don't think every game needs to be shorter. Like you can't put it in a basket and just say, these are all the things you need to do to be successful. And this is what I want. I do agree that it would be great if there were some shorter games, but I just think not every game needs to be Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Starfield, right? These massive, long experiences. I do think there's a market for shorter games. I think some games can be longer. Like, there's plenty to go around, and that's why we're seeing success all over the place.
And they can be sold cheaper, meaning that people don't have to worry about regretting burning a $70 hole in their wallet. I'm not an expert on business by any means, but hedging your bets on $200 million products, no matter how safe it might seem, doesn't guarantee success.
Nothing does.
How right now people are becoming tired of the superhero genre, leading some movies.
The DC movies stink. Marvel oversaturated the market and they're just pushing them out too fast, so they stopped being special. Marvel didn't know what the hell to do after the Infinity War, right? Like how badly they messed everything up after the Infinity War, it's insane to me. Tell the freaking X-Men story. Introduce the X-Men and tell the X-Men story. There you go. What is even happening in the Marvel universe right now? Nobody cares about any of that stuff. Tell another story. Introduce the X-Men. Like, There's so many things that can. It's rumored that GTA 6 will be 4 hours longer than 5. I'm sure it'll do billions of dollars.
Barely breaking
Zombie.
even when you take into account marketing budgets. A smaller budget game not doing well isn't the end of the world though when you have the wiggle room to fail. And if you end up with the next big hit, then the returns can be huge. Just look at the success of this year's Baldur's Gate 3, a title which Microsoft believed that barely anyone would care about. Glowing reviews and word of mouth helped the game explode in popularity, despite it being a CRPG, which is a very old-fashioned genre. But now
it only cost $100 million to make Baldur's Gate 3. How? What? You're telling me Spider-Man 2 cost $400 million or something? Or what did he have on his thing there? $260 million? But Baldur's Gate costs $100 million? What are you doing, Sony? What are you doing, Sony? What's going on? That's nuts. That is absolutely nuts.
Now it's scooping up a bunch of Game of the Year awards, and although I wrote this before most of those awards were handed out, I included that in this because I'm confident in it happening. Although personally, if I'm honest, I think Tears of the Kingdom was Game of the Year. So good. Major publishers wouldn't
Both
dream
were great.
of releasing a game in such a niche genre in this day and age because they believe that people wouldn't like it due to it not being as accessible as your typical AAA title. But it turned out that not only did people want to play it, but they were starving for something different.
Yep, starving is a very good way to put it. We just needed something different.
So if you start seeing more games like Baldur's Gate being released by companies such as EA or Ubisoft in the near future,
great.
You have Larian Studios to thank for that. Or blame.
No, see, I don't think that's true because we already know the next Mass Effect has been in the works for several years, but potentially because of Baldur's Gate 3's success, they'll get more money, more time, and more effort put towards a fantastic new Mass Effect game. So thanks, Baldur's Gate. Do you think AAA games need to release a movie anime alongside them nowadays to get ROI quicker? No. No, I don't. I think that's like an upsell. That's like a bonus. Destiny's going to be doing it. I don't think it's necessary. Thank you, Tuco.
More than likely blame. Like anything else in life, it's good to occasionally step out of your comfort zone. So if you're bored of the landscape of gaming as it is, try more indie games. Play something that you didn't think that you would like, but others love. You never know if something is for you unless you try it. Much like you, I'd rather not see developers, artists, programmers, and everyone else who makes games lose their jobs just so the industry
Nobody wants
crumble and be rebuilt as something else.
Nobody wants that. Like, nobody wants the industry to crumble and be rebuilt. No, I certainly don't want that. Will it happen regardless of what I want? Potentially. Like, what we want and what happens aren't in our control, right? I want everybody to work get a huge salary at a game studio and make only the games that they love. It's like, there's reality also that we need to consider, right? I don't think anybody wants that. Nobody wants the industry to crumble. I am also super burnt out on games as a service, Tyler.
But I do know that no matter who you are, familiarity can breed contempt, and that game companies should treat change as an inevitability instead of something that they need to throw money at to avoid.
I don't, you can check out his Patreon there. AAA games will probably destroy the industry. I don't feel like he proved his point. So like sometimes when I do these React videos, I just want to like, the thesis was AAA games will probably destroy the industry. But he talked about how the industry is having a lot of offshoots, seeing a lot of success with new studios come about, saying that games are too expensive, but there's no evidence proving that it's destroying anything. He even says in his video that the games industry is doing like better than it's ever done. It's like all the other avenues combined are doing less than the games industry is. So I don't feel like the thesis was proven. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. If you're watching live, don't go away. We're not going anywhere. I'm just doing the outro for the VOD. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell to know when I go live. If you want to become a member to support me making content, you can do so. Getting YouTube Plus, which apparently turns off ads. You can click that join button right down there, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm not getting out of here. I'm just doing the sign off for the VOD. If you want to check out one of my other reacts, you can do so. It's right over here. I'll be right back.